So without further ado, let's welcome all the way from Portland, Oregon, Kevin Bobowski.
Thanks, John. Can everybody hear me okay? So there's two things, after you present, when you're the presenter after lunch, there's two things you always have to remember. Number one is you better be interesting because everybody's in their lunch coma. And number two is you want to stay on time because you don't want to be the guy that made everybody late for drinks at the end of the day. So on my phone, I got the alarm to go off at 2:25, Stone Roses, just to make sure that I'm on time. So if you hear that song, that means I'm going to make sure I'm staying on time and getting done on time. So anyways, a little bit about, just a question for the audience. How many of you have heard of how many of you have heard of marketing automation? And how many actually use marketing automation today in some of your businesses? Okay, so some of you do. So I'll tell you a little bit about Outbound. Outbound is a marketing automation software company. And what we do is help companies grow leads and collect leads via web landing pages. And then we help companies nurture, score leads, send emails to the right leads at the right time to warm them up. So when the leads are handed over to sales, the sales are hot, the customers are educated, and they're ready to buy. So that's a little bit about Outbound. And Sean, who's one of my colleagues who's in the back, happy to talk with you a little bit afterwards on the presentation. But what I'm going to talk about today is this notion of inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. And here's the deal, and I think most of you know this. The way that B2B buyers make purchasing decisions today has changed dramatically, right? They're in control. They're leading the charge. They determine when and how they're going to buy. And they're using things like social media. They're using to find out products and services to buy. They get third-party recommendations. They get other sort of third-party advice on where to go. And I think about even my own experience as a marketer. When I think about looking at buying a product or a service, like if I were looking at paid search, vendors, I ask colleagues, I ask friends, I go to trusted sources, and then once I find somebody that might be a service or a product that might be interesting, I go onto the website, I do all the research myself. Rarely am I going in and having a conversation with a salesperson right away. And I think that creates a really interesting challenge for us as marketers. It's a challenge and opportunity. One is a lot of marketers are making these decisions on their own, right? And they're doing all their research. And here's one really important point that I think I want to make about this. There's a buying cycle and there's a sales cycle. On the buying cycle, that's when I determine as head of marketing for Outbound, I have a need and I need to solve that problem. And I go out and do my research. But then I go out and I eventually talk to a salesperson. That salesperson then says, hey, my sales cycle has started. And sort of one tip for you, and I've seen this happen a lot, when your sales cycle is getting shorter and shorter and you're thinking that's an advantage, that might actually be a disadvantage because of what it means is that the buyer, in case it might be me, I may have talked to 3 or 4 different vendors before I reached out to you. You might have been the last person in the deal. You thought the sales cycle was shorter, but in reality, you're last, right? So there's a big difference between the buying cycle and the sales cycle. And what has happened is, as a response to that, marketers have really started focusing over the last several years on inbound marketing. And inbound marketing being focused on driving lots of leads, focused on social media, focused on content, because what they want to do is be as early in that buying cycle as possible to be the first vendor that's attracted, that gets contacted. The problem with that is in inbound marketing, you're driving lots and lots of leads, and a lot of those leads aren't quite ready for sale. So a lot of times, and I've had these conversations with a lot of other companies, software companies in particular, where they have no problem driving lots and lots of leads, but the leads aren't qualified, they haven't been properly educated and nurtured, and the sales team is getting past a lot of leads that just aren't ready, right? So the importance of nurturing those leads, educating them through their buying cycle becomes really, really important. So one of the other interesting responses to marketers, as we've realized that the buyer is kind of in charge of their own buying process, we've started doubling down on inbound marketing and building content in social media. Something really interesting is happening to the marketer and the marketing department. And this is very interesting that we're even having this conversation to say marketing departments are not as relevant as maybe they used to be. And there's a couple reasons for that. If you think about it, there's been all these conversations about marketing departments having more technology budget, more influence than CIOs. So that would seem to lend the argument that marketing departments are more and more relevant, right? But then you start thinking about the other important part of the marketing department where they own the entire brand and the brand is really a collection of all the customer touch points, right? And the marketer is supposed to own the end-to-end life cycle. But what's happening in a lot of marketing departments today is that they're so singularly focused on driving leads that they're actually diminishing their responsibility and their sort of presence and their status within departments. So they're talking about leads, hitting the lead number. Many of you are marketers, you might be measured on the number of leads. It's actually causing your marketing department not to play the strategic role. And so what we talk about in helping marketing departments become more strategic and helping marketing departments become more relevant, it's thinking about the entire customer experience and the customer life cycle and the entire journey. And what we mean by that is a focus on not just driving lots and lots of leads and focusing on demand generation and acquisition marketing, but thinking as much about how do you build a great brand, how do you build a great presence, and perhaps the most important part, how do you deliver an amazing customer experience? Because if you onboard a customer and that customer does not have a great experience with your product or service, what's the likelihood that they're going to recommend your product or service to somebody else? Not very likely. And I think one of the areas that marketing departments are struggling with today is they're so focused in this middle area on driving leads and driving demand through inbound marketing that they are failing to realize that it's really about the customer success and the value of the customer. And we talk a lot about sloppy growth. And if you are singularly focused on something like inbound marketing or just driving leads, you have the propensity to drive a lot of sloppy growth where you're actually acquiring customers that might not be your ideal customer profile. So talking about inbound marketing, these are some of the different tactics that include inbound marketing. Paid search, I think, is one that's often up for a lot of debate. I think an inbound marketing purist will tell you that inbound marketing has nothing to do with paid acquisition. And there's some people who define inbound marketing to include paid search, but I think this gives you a good sense of all the different aspects of inbound marketing. So I'm going through and I'm talking about inbound marketing. I'm talking about the perils of focusing too much on leads and too much on demand generation. So the question is, are leads dead? And how many of you are in a marketing department here and work closely with your sales department? I think it'd be really, really tough for us as marketers to go back to the office this afternoon, tomorrow morning, go to our sales team and say, hey, leads don't matter anymore. We're going to be focused on something different, right? So that's not the answer. I think leads are important, but I think if all you're focused on are leads and driving a number of leads and not thinking about the quality of those leads, not thinking about the customers you're acquiring and the experience that you're delivering to those customers, you're at risk of seeing your marketing department become less relevant. So us as marketers, I think we love kind of the new shiny, theme or topic. We love new kind of like technologies. So I think a lot of us bought into the inbound marketing component because it was big and it's hot and it still is. And it's not to diminish inbound marketing because inbound marketing is very important, but I think it's about balance. And I think if you go in and you talk about, hey, I'm just going to focus on inbound marketing, I think you need to think more broadly about other marketing tactics. And when I talked about shiny new trends and big ideas, I think the new big idea today is around account-based marketing. And how many of you have heard about account-based marketing or outbound marketing? Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So one of the things about when you're in a B2B company and you're selling to other B2B companies, you're not selling to a lead, you're selling to accounts and contact in those companies, right? And so your head of sales is probably talking a lot about an account that they're going to win or a deal they're going to win. When you lose a customer, you don't talk about losing a lead, you talk about losing a company or a customer, right? So another benefit of being relevant in your organization is to start thinking more about accounts and companies and less about specific leads. And this takes us to what we're calling putting the B back into B2B marketing. And I think if you just singularly focus just on inbound, you run the risk of being very lead-driven. But if you think about outbound marketing and you think about account-based marketing and you think about accounts, you can actually go out and be more proactive in going after your ideal customer profiles. And so one of the questions that we always ask when you're thinking about doing an outbound marketing strategy, do you know who your ideal customer profile is? And a lot of times you ask people, what is your ideal customer profile? And you get answers like marketers or small business or big companies. But it takes a lot more it takes a lot more work and detail and analysis to get more detailed. So part of what is important is really understanding your go-to-market. And to understand your go-to-market, you need to really understand what your ideal customer profile is and what they look like in as much detail as possible. And once you know that, and you kind of go through this process of who have you won in the past, which customers have kind of been your most successful, which customers have the highest lifetime value, you're starting to get an idea of what your ideal customer profile is. And from there, and these are some of the ways that you can start to reach your ideal customer profile through outbound marketing. So email, trade shows like we're at today, and you can see some of the other different tactics. And we believe that the benefit of, I know some of you were taking pictures, so I'll go back to that page. We think the benefit is not to go all inbound, not to go all outbound, but to build a balanced approach to marketing where you combine the best of inbound marketing and the best of outbound marketing. And like I said before, marketers tend to sway in one direction or the other, go all in on inbound, they go all in on outbound. We think that the key to success is balance. And by combining the two and really understanding who your customer profile is, it makes your outbound marketing programs much more efficient, but it also makes your inbound marketing programs much more efficient and effective too, because you know who you're writing to when you build content, when you write blogs, when you're doing social media campaigns. By understanding your ideal customer profile and their pain points, the content that you produce will be much better, much more targeted, and much more of a higher quality. So what does the data say about inbound marketing and outbound marketing? And I'm going to walk through a couple stats just to show what we're seeing in some of our surveys when we've asked marketers how they're thinking about these two different approaches, where they're investing their dollars and their resources. So the first one is, most marketers are actually saying they kind of use inbound and outbound equally for the most part, which is good. I think if you talk to kind of the press and the media, they might talk a lot about, well, outbound's really hot or everybody's doing inbound or one or the other. But again, it comes back down to balance. The second is around budget. And there was a perception when you think about, there was a perception recently that marketing departments were spending all of their money on acquisition marketing programs, they were spending all their marketing program dollars on inbound, or they were spending all their headcount on inbound marketing programs, hiring content marketing people and social media people. The reality is it was a much more balanced allocation of budget, and those companies that allocated their budget accordingly and balanced across inbound and outbound marketing actually performed better than their peers who did not. So again, this supports this argument of keeping a very balanced approach to marketing and making sure that you're balanced across those two different pieces. And the last point, which is really important, is while there's a perception that inbound marketing drives all leads, inbound marketing and outbound marketing collectively drive the same number of leads for companies. So this again kind of proves this point where a balanced approach to marketing where you're thinking more about inbound, you're thinking equally about outbound marketing really drives the most success for the business. And the same thing goes with revenue. So while the leads are equal, revenue for the customers are about the same as well. So the revenue that comes from those different sources. So final stat talking point today, and just to highlight some of these key metrics. Does anybody measure this metric in their company, lifetime value or cost of acquisition? So a couple people do, and that's great. So this is one of the more interesting statistics from a marketer's perspective on measuring the success of your go-to-market strategy and the success of your marketing programs. The top piece is lifetime value, and that's all about when you acquire a customer, what is their value over time? Do they renew? Do they make some additional upsells or purchases? Do they buy additional services along the way? Lifetime value is really, really important to measure because it tells you whether or not you're acquiring the right customers. And I talked a few minutes ago about sloppy growth, and one of the perils of focusing too much, say, on inbound is that you might acquire the wrong customers. Those customers have different needs and expectations, so it makes it harder for the sales team to sell because they're not used to those types of customers. Those customers might have different expectations around what the product does, so it might divert your product development strategy and roadmap. So it's really important to make sure that you're acquiring the right cohort or set of customers that have the highest lifetime value. Those are the most likely to renew. On the bottom part of the equation is the cost of acquisition. So how much does it cost you to acquire a customer? And I bet many of you as marketers measure that from your paid search programs or social or some of the other programs. What's your overall cost of acquisition from a sales perspective and a marketing perspective? And this tells you how efficient you are taking at generating leads, converting pipeline, and selling deals across the entire business, right? And again, if you're going after the right customers and it's the right set of customers in an industry or segment, the sales organization, the marketing organization should be a lot more efficient at going after them and converting them into customers. So you take the two statistics, and an ideal benchmark is a benchmark of 2 to 3x or more. So if your cost of acquisition, say, is $100, and I'm making up numbers, and your lifetime value is $300, then you're in a very good position. But you'll find what a lot of companies are in positions, they're at 1.5 or they're closer to 2, and they need to figure out one of a couple things. Maybe they're not being super efficient on their acquisition side of marketing, or maybe they're not acquiring the right set of customers. And the reality, it's probably a combination of both. It's how do you balance and make sure that the customer experience and the customer onboarding process is great, so you drive a lot of lifetime value, you have a lot of satisfied, happy customers, and those happy customers and satisfied customers become your advocates in the marketplace to recommend your product to colleagues and friends and other people in the industry, which ultimately helps drive down your cost of acquisition. So that's the kind of the last summary slide. I would highly recommend as a marketer, if you're not measuring this, you should. Sometimes the information isn't easy to get, but it's very enlightening because it really tells you how well you're set up to do long term. And it really helps you understand how well you're functioning, not just across marketing, but across sales, across product, and all the other functions. And if you're driving this as a marketer, then you're really cementing your position at the table of kind of key strategic decision makers within your organization, within your company. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments. No? Good? All right. Right after the lunch.
Oh, generally a no.
Yeah.
Pretty sure we didn't get the Stone Roses bit either.
No, not yet.
We're on, I think we've gained a little bit of time back, actually, so that's good. No questions for Kevin out there? No? All makes sense? Okay, well, big thank you to Kevin for coming along, doing his bit.